the day the system turned against them. At 9:02 a.m., Evelyn Carter was escorted out of the cybersecurity command floor like a criminal. Not fired. Not suspended. Escorted. 2 HR representatives, 1 security guard, and 30 silent employees pretending to stare at their monitors. Her access badge had already been deactivated. The message had arrived at 8:54 a.m., 8 minutes earlier. Due to the recent security breach, Northbridge Dynamics has decided to terminate your position effective immediately. No meeting. No explanation. Just a quiet accusation wrapped in corporate language. Across the room, the new hire stood beside the CEO. 24 years old. Expensive suit. Perfect smile. His name was Tyler Knox. The board called him a cybersecurity prodigy. They said he would rebuild what Evelyn Carter had supposedly destroyed. As the elevator doors closed, Tyler gave her a polite nod. The kind of nod people give when they believe the story they were told. But Tyler didn't know something. None of them did. The breach they blamed her for? It wasn't the first warning the system had given. And the security architecture protecting Northbridge was never designed to be loyal to the company. It was designed to be loyal to the truth. And the truth had already started recording everything. The moment Evelyn Carter walked out of the building, most people at Northbridge Dynamics thought Evelyn Carter was ordinary. That was the first mistake they made. She did not dress like the executives. She did not talk like the consultants. She did not walk into conference rooms carrying performance decks and polished phrases about innovation. She wore dark blazers, low heels, and the same silver watch every day. She spoke in precise sentences. She listened more than she talked. And when other people panicked, Evelyn Carter became quieter. That silence made people underestimate her. At 6:40 a.m., while most of the executive floor was still dark, Evelyn Carter had already been inside Northbridge for almost an hour, reviewing overnight security logs with black coffee gone cold beside her keyboard. She had done that for 13 years. Not because anyone asked her to, because she understood something the board never did. A company's greatest weakness is never the code. It is the ego of the people allowed to touch it. Northbridge sold cybersecurity infrastructure to hospitals, logistics firms, and financial institutions across the country. On paper, it was one of the most trusted security companies in America. Inside the building, it was held together by deadlines, politics, and people who loved the word resilience more than the work it required. And under all of that, hidden beneath polished dashboards and investor briefings, sat the architecture Evelyn Carter had built. Layer by layer, year by year, she had designed the internal containment logic after a ransomware scare in her second year. She had rebuilt the privilege map after discovering 2 senior engineers were quietly sharing credentials. She had created internal shadow logging after a vice president insisted executives should be exempt from activity monitoring. That meeting had happened 7 years earlier. The vice president had laughed and said, "Trust has to start somewhere." Evelyn Carter had answered without smiling, "Trust is not a security model." The room had gone silent. The policy stayed. So did the resentment. At 11:16 a.m., 3 weeks before she was fired, Evelyn Carter sat in conference room glass 4 with the CEO, the CFO, general counsel, and 2 board advisors who treated every technical warning like a weather update. On the screen behind her was a red-lined access map, 3 unusual admin behaviors, 2 failed privilege jumps, 1 dormant credential chain waking up inside a restricted environment. "This is not noise," Evelyn Carter said. "Someone is testing internal movement." The CFO leaned back and folded his hands over his stomach. "Could be routine maintenance." "It is not," she said. One of the advisors gave her the tired look men often gave competent women when they were already preparing not to listen. "What exactly are you saying, Evelyn?" She clicked to the next slide. A timeline. Credential anomalies. Login origin shifts. Internal policy overrides. "I'm saying someone with approved access is creating the conditions for a controlled breach." The CEO frowned. "A controlled breach by whom?" "I don't know yet." That answer annoyed them. Executives do not like uncertain truth. They prefer false certainty delivered with confidence. The board advisor sighed and tapped his pen. "So we have suspicion, not proof." We have early indicators, Evelyn Carter said. That is when prevention works. General Counsel asked the question that told her everything. If we escalate this and it turns out to be nothing, what is the reputational risk? Not what is the operational risk, not what is the exposure. Reputational risk. That was the moment Evelyn Carter understood they were no longer protecting the system. They were protecting appearances. At 11:24 a.m., she closed the presentation and said the sentence no one in that room wanted to hear. If you ignore this, the system will document every bad decision after today. The CEO looked up. What does that mean? It means the architecture was designed to preserve an evidentiary trail, even if leadership fails. The room changed after that. Not visibly, not dramatically, but she felt it. The shift from tolerance to threat. Northbridge liked her when she was useful. It liked her less when she became impossible to control. That afternoon, Tyler Knox appeared in the building for the first time. He was introduced as a strategic consultant. Temporary, external, advisory only. He was 24, confident, photogenic, and fluent in that polished tech language investors loved. He spoke about agility, modernization, adaptive risk, and next-generation infrastructure. The board looked at him the way children look at fireworks. He made old ideas sound new. He made dangerous ideas sound efficient. And most importantly, he made Evelyn Carter sound outdated without ever saying it directly. At 2:08 p.m., Tyler stopped by her office, holding a tablet and a smile too clean to be sincere. I've heard a lot about you, he said. That usually means something bad, Evelyn Carter replied. He laughed, like she had made a charming joke. I'm here to help streamline some of the legacy protocols. Legacy. There it was. The favorite insult of mediocre people who inherit functioning systems. She turned in her chair and looked at him fully for the first time. He was smart enough to be dangerous. Not because he knew more than she did, because he knew exactly how much less he knew and was still willing to act certain. That architecture is layered for a reason, she said. Tyler tilted his head. Sometimes complexity becomes its own vulnerability. Sometimes simplicity is just exposure with better branding. His smile thinned. For 1 second, the polished version of him disappeared. Not enough for anyone else to notice. Enough for her. He glanced at the screen behind her. Do you always keep autonomous audit tracing live? Do you always ask questions you don't need the answer to? That smile returned. He nodded once. Good talking to you, Evelyn. But after he left, Evelyn Carter did not go back to work immediately. She stared at the door. Because Tyler had not asked that question casually. He had asked it because he already knew the protocol existed. And almost no one knew that. Not the board. Not HR. Not even most senior engineers. The autonomous audit protocol was her private safeguard. A buried function inside the company's internal security spine. If a breach crossed certain thresholds, the system would not just seal damage. It would reconstruct behavior. 30 days backward. Every elevated access event. Every override. Every deleted record. Every altered permission tree. And once the chain reached evidentiary confidence, the report would go somewhere no executive could intercept. Not to IT. Not to legal. To an external compliance archive tied to investor oversight agreements, triggered during a prior funding round. A clause no one remembered. A clause Evelyn Carter had insisted remain active. At 7:51 p.m., alone on the command floor under dim overhead lights, Evelyn Carter opened the dormant audit shell and reviewed the threshold logic one last time. Not out of paranoia. Out of instinct. The kind built from years of surviving rooms where people smiled at you while moving your chair toward the door. Everything was intact. The tracing chain was armed. The archive route was active. The evidentiary compression model was clean. She sat back slowly. For the first time in weeks, she felt something colder than fear. Certainty. If someone inside Northbridge was building a breach, the system would catch them. Even if she did not. Even if they removed her first. At 8:03 p.m., the cleaning crew rolled carts through the hallway as Evelyn Carter shut down her monitor and picked up her coat. Before leaving, she looked once at the dark reflection of herself in the glass wall. Tired eyes. Still posture. A woman no one in that building truly understood. Then she whispered the same sentence she used whenever people with titles confused power with control. The logs don't care who signs the checks. 3 weeks later, she was blamed for the breach. Escorted out. Replaced. Humiliated. But as the elevator doors closed on the morning of her termination, one silent process had already awakened deep inside Northbridge's architecture. Not loud. Not visible. Not stoppable. The system had begun tracing the hands that touched it. And for the first time, Northbridge was no longer being protected by leadership. It was being measured by evidence. 3 days before the breach that destroyed her career, Evelyn Carter noticed something small. Not dramatic. Not catastrophic. Just a flicker in the internal privilege logs. Most engineers would have ignored it. Because nothing had technically broken. At 10:42 a.m., while reviewing the overnight security trace, Evelyn Carter saw an access elevation request that lasted exactly 3 seconds before being revoked. No alert triggered. No system alarm. But the origin was strange. The request had come from an administrative credential that normally only activated during scheduled maintenance windows. The next maintenance window was 2 weeks away. She opened the trace. One request. 3 seconds. Then silence. That silence bothered her more than the request itself, because experienced intruders never move loudly. They test the doors first. At 11:05 a.m., Evelyn Carter ran a shadow comparison against the internal credential map. The system returned a clean structure. No missing roles. No corrupted permissions. Everything looked normal. Too normal. That was the second signal. Real systems are messy. Perfect structures usually mean someone cleaned something. And someone cleaning logs without authorization was far more dangerous than someone triggering alarms. At 12:11 p.m., Evelyn Carter walked past the executive conference room and saw Tyler Knox inside, with the CEO and 2 board advisors. The glass walls made the meeting look transparent, but soundproofing made it impossible to hear. Tyler stood beside the presentation screen, animated and confident. The CEO nodded several times. One advisor leaned forward, clearly impressed. Tyler was selling them something. She kept walking. People like Tyler never presented ideas. They presented solutions to problems executives did not yet understand. At 1:26 p.m., back at her workstation, Evelyn Carter opened the credential trace again. This time, she did not search for anomalies. She searched for patterns, privilege escalations, login geography shifts, internal access requests that appeared legitimate but occurred just slightly outside routine behavior. A mosaic began forming. Small events, harmless by themselves, suspicious. Together. Someone was mapping the building from inside the walls, not breaking the locks, learning where they were. At 3:08 p.m., the internal monitoring console displayed something that made her pause. A maintenance policy had been edited. The changelog listed the author as System Admin Group, which meant the edit had been executed through a shared executive privilege override, a tool originally designed for emergency recovery, a tool that bypassed most logging layers. Very few people had access to it. The CEO, the CTO, and 2 legacy accounts used during infrastructure migration years earlier, accounts that were supposed to be inactive. At 3:09 p.m., Evelyn Carter opened the legacy account registry. One account showed activity. It should not have existed anymore. She stared at the screen for several seconds. Then she ran a historical trace. The system returned nothing. No login. No activity trail. Just the edited policy, which meant someone had used the override and erased the visible entry. Most people would have stopped there, because if the system says nothing happened, arguing with it becomes political suicide. But Evelyn Carter did not rely on the primary log. She relied on the shadow logs, the ones she built 7 years earlier when executives demanded privacy exceptions. Shadow logs did not erase. They simply recorded. Quietly, patiently, she opened the hidden console, typed 3 commands, and waited. The server processed the request. 30 seconds passed. Then the first trace appeared. Not a username. Not yet. Just a timestamp. At 3:06 p.m., someone had accessed the legacy admin override, 2 minutes before the maintenance policy changed. That alone was not proof, but it was enough for instinct. Someone inside Northbridge was touching tools they should not even know existed. At 3:12 p.m., Evelyn Carter stood up and walked to the far end of the cybersecurity floor, where the internal traffic monitor projected onto a large wall display. Colored flows of network activity pulsed across the map like arteries, data moving through servers, clients connecting, security layers filtering millions of requests per minute. To everyone else, it looked like controlled chaos. To her, it looked like a living organism. And organisms react when something foreign enters the bloodstream. At 3:13 p.m., a small burst appeared in the lower right quadrant of the map. Internal packet traffic. Short-lived. Encrypted. Originating from an administrative workstation. The workstation belonged to Tyler Knox. The connection lasted less than 2 seconds. Then, disappeared. Most analysts would call that background noise. Evelyn Carter called it curiosity. And curiosity inside restricted infrastructure was never innocent. At 4:27 p.m., Tyler appeared beside her desk again. He leaned casually against the cubicle wall. Long day. Not particularly, Evelyn Carter replied. He glanced toward her monitors. You still monitoring internal privilege layers? Yes. Tyler smiled. You know the board is talking about simplifying that architecture. Simplifying security usually means weakening it. Or modernizing it. Those words often mean the same thing. He laughed softly. You're very protective of the system. I'm protective of reality. That answer lingered between them longer than Tyler expected. He pushed away from the cubicle wall. Well, progress is inevitable. Then he walked away. But as he reached the end of the aisle, he paused briefly. Looked back. Not at her. At the network wall. Then he left the floor. At 6:48 p.m., most employees had gone home. The building felt hollow. The quiet hours when systems revealed their truest behavior. Evelyn Carter ran one more audit check before shutting down for the night. Everything looked stable. No alarms, no visible intrusions. But stability in cybersecurity is rarely comfort. It often means the attack is still rehearsing. At 9:14 p.m., a remote access event appeared inside the internal logs. Origin, internal workstation, privilege request, elevated system access. Duration, 9 seconds. Then the request vanished. The same pattern. Testing doors. Learning timing. Measuring responses. This time, however, the system did something new. Because of the threshold rules Evelyn Carter built years earlier, 2 suspicious privilege attempts within 72 hours triggered a dormant observer protocol. The system did not block the user. It did not alert administrators. It simply began recording everything. 30 days backward. 30 days forward. Every permission shift. Every credential touch. Every silent edit. The audit engine had awakened. Deep inside, Northbridge infrastructure. Invisible to executives. Invisible to Tyler Knox. Invisible even to the security team. At 9:17 p.m., Evelyn Carter closed the console and turned off the lights above her desk. She did not know who was testing the system yet, but she knew something else with absolute certainty. The architecture was no longer just defending the company. It was documenting it. 3 days later, the breach would happen. The board would panic. The blame would fall on her, and Evelyn Carter would be escorted out of the building, like a liability. But the system she built had already started doing something far more dangerous than revenge. It had begun collecting the truth. And once that process finished, Northbridge would not be able to pretend ignorance ever again. For 13 years, Evelyn Carter had prepared Northbridge for the day something would break. She just never imagined the company would break faster than the system. The breach began quietly. Not with alarms. Not with flashing warnings. But with a phone call. At 7:18 a.m., Evelyn Carter had just placed her bag beside her desk when the client escalation line lit up. The caller ID showed one of Northbridge's largest hospital networks in California. She answered immediately. Northbridge Security Operations. This is Evelyn Carter. The voice on the other end sounded tense. Our authentication servers are rejecting verified tokens. Your gateway is denying traffic. That should not have been possible. Northbridge infrastructure authenticated millions of requests every hour. A rejection cascade meant something inside the trust chain had shifted. At 7:20 a.m., Evelyn Carter opened the gateway console and ran a real-time traffic check. The dashboard froze for half a second. Then the screen filled with red. Authentication failures. Session conflicts. Encrypted packet loops. Something inside the core verification layer was rewriting credential responses. That layer was not supposed to be editable without executive-level override. At 7:22 a.m., Evelyn Carter initiated containment protocol. The system began isolating affected nodes, but the isolation spread faster than expected. Because the breach was not attacking from the outside, it was moving from the inside out. At 7:26 a.m., the cybersecurity floor began filling with engineers. Phones ringing, monitors lighting up, conversations rising into controlled panic. Someone shouted across the room, "Financial clients are reporting authentication failures too." Another voice followed, "Internal admin console is locking out credential refresh." The system was collapsing in slow motion, but not randomly. Every failure followed a precise pattern. Access nodes shutting down, recovery tools failing, backup pathways rejecting their own credentials. Which meant one thing: someone had rewritten the permission logic. At 7:31 a.m., Evelyn Carter checked the shadow logs. The audit engine had been recording for 3 days. The trace chain was already assembling itself, but she did not have time to read it. Right now, the only priority was containment. At 7:33 a.m., the CEO stormed onto the cybersecurity floor with Tyler Knox close behind him. Executives rarely visited this part of the building. They preferred the floors with glass offices and investor presentations. But crises pull power toward the problem. "What is happening?" the CEO demanded. Evelyn Carter did not turn around from her monitor. "Internal permission corruption. Someone altered trust validation. Can you stop it?" "I'm trying." Tyler stepped closer to the screens. His voice was calm. Too calm. "How long has this vulnerability existed?" Evelyn Carter glanced at him. "It isn't a vulnerability." He folded his arms. "Then explain the failure." She returned to the console. "This system is not failing on its own." The CEO's voice hardened. "Are you saying someone inside Northbridge caused this?" "I'm saying the architecture is responding to something introduced through an internal privilege path." That answer made the executives uneasy. Internal sabotage was a nightmare scenario. External hackers were easier to blame. At 7:41 a.m., another alert appeared. A credential chain deep inside the infrastructure had just overwritten a policy group. The author field displayed the worst possible message. System admin group. The same override tool she had seen 3 days earlier. At 7:44 a.m., Tyler leaned closer to the monitor. Could someone have modified the legacy admin permissions? "They shouldn't exist anymore," Evelyn Carter said. "But if they did?" Tyler pressed. She did not answer immediately, because the implication was obvious. If someone had used the legacy override pathway, they could alter authentication behavior without triggering most alerts. The CEO turned toward her. "Are you telling me you left a hidden administrative pathway active inside our system?" That question changed the atmosphere of the room. Evelyn Carter finally turned in her chair. "The pathway existed long before me." "But you knew about it." "Yes." "And you didn't close it?" "Because removing it would have broken disaster recovery during the 2017 migration." The CEO looked furious. "So our entire infrastructure is collapsing because you decided to keep a back door open?" "That is not what I said." But executives do not listen during crises. They search for the fastest explanation that protects their own position. At 7:52 a.m., the first external news alert appeared on someone's phone. A financial client had already reported service disruption. If the breach reached investors, Northbridge's stock would collapse. The CEO made a decision. The wrong one, but the fastest. He turned toward Tyler Knox. "Can you analyze the permission chain?" Tyler nodded. "Already doing it." His fingers moved across a tablet, connected to a mirrored diagnostic system. 30 seconds passed. Then he spoke carefully. "There's a configuration cluster tied to the legacy admin layer." The CEO's eyes narrowed. "Who maintains that cluster?" Tyler looked directly at Evelyn Carter. She does. The room went silent. At 8:03 a.m., Tyler projected a timeline onto the wall. A sequence of system edits, policy changes, credential conflicts, all connected through the legacy admin pathway. Every arrow on the diagram pointed toward one name: Evelyn Carter. It looked convincing. Because parts of it were true. She had built that architecture. She had maintained the policy cluster. She had defended the system for 13 years. Which meant blaming her required very little imagination. At 8:12 a.m., the CEO's voice was quiet. "Evelyn, is this accurate?" She stared at the projection. Something felt wrong. The timeline looked too clean. Real breaches were messy. This one looked rehearsed. Then she noticed the detail Tyler had hidden. The timestamps. They were compressed, grouped, edited. The sequence had been rearranged. But executives were not cybersecurity analysts. They saw a story. And the story had a villain. At 8:14 a.m., Evelyn Carter said one sentence. "That timeline is incomplete." Tyler tilted his head. "Do you have another explanation?" "I will." "When?" She looked at the system clock. "Soon." But the CEO had already made up his mind. Because admitting uncertainty would terrify the board. And markets punish uncertainty faster than failure. At 8:29 a.m., HR was called. At 8:41 a.m., her access privileges were revoked. At 8:54 a.m., the termination message was sent. At 9:02 a.m., Evelyn Carter was escorted out of Northbridge Dynamics. Employees watched from behind their screens. Some shocked. Some relieved it was not them. And Tyler Knox stood near the CEO with the calm posture of a man who had just solved a crisis. But deep inside the system he believed he controlled, a silent process continued running. The autonomous audit protocol had been collecting evidence since the first suspicious access event. It had already reconstructed the true timeline. Not the one Tyler showed the board. The real one. Every login. Every override. Every erased trace. And somewhere inside that expanding record was the moment someone tried to frame Evelyn Carter. The system had seen it. The logs had preserved it. And very soon, so would everyone else. When Evelyn Carter stepped outside the glass doors of Northbridge Dynamics, the air felt colder than it should have. Not because of the weather. Because of the silence behind her. 13 years inside that building had ended in less than 10 minutes. The security guard held the door open. Not aggressively. Just professionally. Like a man who had done this many times before. At 9:06 a.m., Evelyn Carter walked across the plaza in front of the building, her access badge already useless inside her coat pocket. Employees inside the lobby avoided eye contact. Some people fear guilt. Most people fear association. She reached the edge of the street and stopped beside a row of parked cars. For the first time since the breach began, she allowed herself to breathe slowly. The system was still running, and the system did not care who had just been fired. At 9:08 a.m., 40 floors above her, the cybersecurity floor was beginning to stabilize. Authentication failures were decreasing. Backup routing had partially recovered. The crisis was not solved. But it was controlled enough for executives to regain their confidence. The CEO stood at the center of the command floor, speaking with investors through a headset. Tyler Knox remained beside the large network wall. He looked calm. Victorious. Like a man who had just proven something important. "Status?" the CEO asked. Tyler glanced at the screen. "Containment is holding." "Cause?" Tyler tapped his tablet and projected the same diagram again. The legacy admin cluster allowed a policy override chain to propagate through authentication layers. "And that traces back to Evelyn?" "Yes." The CEO exhaled slowly. Then he said the sentence executives use when they believe the story is finished. "Then we move forward." But the system had not finished speaking. Deep inside the internal security architecture, the autonomous audit protocol continued reconstructing the truth. Unlike Tyler's projection, the audit engine did not compress timestamps. It did not rearrange events. It simply followed cause and effect. At 9:11 a.m., the audit process completed the first phase, credential reconstruction. Every privileged login during the previous 30 days appeared inside the evidentiary chain. At 9:13 a.m., the system began Phase 2. Privilege override analysis, legacy admin tools, emergency permissions, executive access pathways, the very mechanisms Tyler had quietly used. At 9:15 a.m., the algorithm found the anomaly. The first unauthorized access. 3 days before the breach. Legacy account override. Duration, 6 seconds. Origin workstation ID. NX 447. Assigned user Tyler Knox. The system did not react emotionally. It simply recorded the data. At 9:18 a.m., the audit engine moved forward. The policy edit, the credential reshaping, the silent log deletion attempt. Each step reconstructed, each timestamp verified, each action connected. At 9:21 a.m., the evidentiary confidence threshold crossed 97%. That triggered the final stage. External compliance report generation. A function almost no one inside Northbridge remembered. 7 years earlier, during a major investment round, regulators had required an independent compliance archive. The clause existed to prevent executives from hiding internal security failures. The board had signed the agreement, then forgotten it, but Evelyn Carter had not forgotten. Because she had built the mechanism. At 9:24 a.m., the report finalized. A compressed evidentiary file. Privilege traces. Credential maps. Timeline reconstruction. And one undeniable conclusion. The breach had not originated from the architecture Evelyn Carter maintained. It had originated from a legacy admin override executed by Tyler Knox. At 9:25 a.m., the system transmitted the report. Not to Northbridge executives, not to internal legal, but to the external compliance archive monitored by the company's investor oversight board. At the same moment, an automated notification email was triggered. Recipients: Investor Compliance Group, Regulatory Security Liaison, Northbridge Board Oversight Committee. Subject line: Unauthorized Administrative Override. Detected. Inside the command floor, no one noticed. The executives were busy congratulating themselves for stabilizing the crisis. At 9:28 a.m., Tyler Knox leaned back against the console and allowed himself a small smile. He had done it. He had taken control of the narrative. The board believed him. The CEO trusted him. And the person who might have challenged his version of events was already gone. But systems do not respect narratives. They respect data. At 9:31 a.m., the CEO's phone vibrated. He ignored it. At 9:32 a.m., the general counsel's phone vibrated. He checked the message, then froze. At 9:33 a.m., another phone vibrated. Then another. Board members across 3 different offices were opening the same report, reading the same reconstruction, seeing the same name attached to the first unauthorized override, Tyler Knox. Inside the command floor, Tyler noticed the change in the room before anyone spoke. Executives stopped talking. Conversations ended mid-sentence. The CEO slowly lowered his phone. His eyes moved across the floor until they landed on Tyler. Tyler. The tone had changed. Tyler straightened slightly. Yes? The CEO lifted the phone and turned the screen toward him. What is this? Tyler glanced at the report. For the first time that morning, his confidence cracked. Because the report was not speculation. It was evidence. Complete. Unedited. Irrefutable. The audit engine had done what he thought he had prevented. It had reconstructed everything. At 9:36 a.m., the CEO spoke again. Security. 2 guards stepped forward from the elevator. Not the same guards who escorted Evelyn Carter out earlier. Different ones. But the procedure was identical. Professional. Quiet. Final. Tyler looked around the room, searching for support. No one spoke. No one defended him. Because evidence does something power never can. It ends arguments. At 9:38 a.m., the guard reached for Tyler's access badge. Across the plaza, outside the building, Evelyn Carter sat in her car, watching the glass tower of Northbridge reflect the morning sun. Her phone vibrated once. A single automated notification. Audit protocol complete. She read the confirmation message, then closed the phone without smiling. Because revenge had never been the goal. Truth was. And Truth had just walked back into the building she had been forced to leave. Inside Northbridge Dynamics, the atmosphere had changed in less than 5 minutes. Confidence had turned into silence. At 9:41 a.m., Tyler Knox sat in a security chair near the elevator, while 2 guards stood beside him. No handcuffs. No shouting. Just the quiet collapse of a reputation. The CEO had read the report 3 times already. Every line led to the same conclusion. The breach had started with a legacy admin override, executed from Tyler's workstation. The logs were precise. The timestamps, undeniable. The audit engine had reconstructed the entire sequence. Even the moment Tyler attempted to delete the traces, which meant something else had become painfully clear. The woman they fired had not caused the breach. She had predicted it. At 9:43 a.m., the general counsel spoke first. "We need to contact Evelyn immediately." The CEO did not answer. Because he understood the deeper problem. Calling Evelyn Carter now would not just be an apology. It would be an admission. At 9:45 a.m., Tyler finally spoke. "You're making a mistake." No one responded. "The logs can be manipulated," he insisted. That sentence died in the air. Because everyone in the room had already read the section explaining the autonomous audit protocol. The system had verified itself across independent trace layers. It was impossible to fake. Tyler looked around the command floor, searching for doubt. But doubt had already left the room. At 9:48 a.m., the CEO turned toward legal. "Prepare a statement for investors." What kind of statement? The honest one. The words sounded unfamiliar in a corporate building. But evidence leaves very few alternatives. At 9:52 a.m., Tyler's access credentials were permanently revoked. His tablet shut down. His mirrored diagnostic session disappeared. And with it, the illusion that he controlled the narrative. The guard tapped his shoulder. "We're going downstairs." Tyler stood slowly. As he walked toward the elevator, he passed the network wall where his presentation had blamed Evelyn Carter less than 2 hours earlier. The diagram was still visible, but the story behind it had already collapsed. At 9:55 a.m., the CEO returned to his office and closed the door. The glass wall faced the skyline, but he did not look outside. He looked at the message he had sent earlier. The termination notice. Cold. Immediate. Final. He opened his phone again, then hesitated. For the first time that morning, the most powerful man in Northbridge Dynamics felt something unfamiliar. Embarrassment. At 9:57 a.m., he dialed the number. Across the street from the building, Evelyn Carter sat inside her car with the engine still off. She had not driven away. Not yet. Part of her knew the call would come. The system had already finished its work. Her phone vibrated. She looked at the screen. Northbridge Executive Office. She let it ring twice. Then answered. Yes. The CEO's voice sounded different now. Less certain. "Evelyn, we need to talk." She waited. Executives often speak too quickly when silence appears. "You were right," he continued. "About the breach." "Yes," Evelyn Carter said calmly. There was no anger in her voice, which somehow made the conversation harder. "The system. It generated an audit report," the CEO said. "I know." That surprised him. "You knew?" "I built it." Another silence followed. At 10:02 a.m., the CEO said the sentence he never expected to say that morning. "We want you to come back." She looked through the windshield at the Northbridge Tower rising above the plaza. 13 years of work inside those walls. 13 years protecting people who barely understood what she protected them from. "You don't want me back," Evelyn Carter replied. "You want the system back. That system is yours." "No," she said quietly. "It belongs to the architecture." The CEO rubbed his forehead. "Evelyn, we made a mistake." "Yes." The honesty helped. But it did not change the situation. At 10:05 a.m., Evelyn Carter spoke again. "If I come back, 3 things change." "I'm listening." "First," she said, "security decisions are no longer overridden by executives who don't understand the system." The CEO nodded slowly. "Second, the audit protocol remains permanent." Agreed. She paused, then delivered the final condition. Third, I don't report to anyone who can fire me in the middle of a crisis. The CEO understood immediately. You want independent authority. I want accountability. The difference mattered. At 10:09 a.m., the CEO said the only answer possible. You'll have it. Outside the building, employees began gathering near the entrance. Word was spreading quickly. Tyler Knox had been escorted out. The breach had been traced. And the woman who built the system had been telling the truth. At 10:12 a.m., Evelyn Carter ended the call. She did not celebrate. She did not smile. Because justice inside corporations rarely feels dramatic. It feels quiet, inevitable. She stepped out of the car and walked back across the plaza toward the glass doors of Northbridge Dynamics. This time, no one avoided eye contact, and when the security guard opened the door again, he spoke with a different tone. Welcome back, Miss Carter. At 10:14 a.m., Evelyn Carter walked into the building she had protected for 13 years. But this time, something inside Northbridge had changed. Not the system. The people. Because they had finally learned the lesson she had been teaching all along. Systems can be manipulated. Power can be abused. But truth, when properly recorded, eventually walks back through the front door. Lessons learned. 1. Truth doesn't need defense. It needs records. Lies can be loud. Power can be intimidating. But truth becomes unstoppable when it is properly documented. The smartest protection is not arguing with people. It is building systems that remember everything. 2. The most dangerous people are not the loudest. They are the most confidently wrong. Tyler Knox didn't hack the system with brilliance. He exploited arrogance. The arrogance of executives who believed appearance mattered more than reality. In many organizations, incompetence doesn't destroy systems. Overconfidence does. 3. Real power is invisible until the moment it is needed. For 13 years, Evelyn Carter built layers of protection no one appreciated. Quiet work rarely receives applause, but when everything collapses, the quiet work becomes the only thing holding the world together. 4. A good system does not protect people. It protects the truth. If a system only protects authority, it will eventually be abused. But a system designed to protect evidence will outlive every executive decision. Truth is the only security model that cannot be manipulated forever. 5. Sometimes the best revenge is simply letting the truth arrive. You don't always need to fight. You don't always need to prove yourself. Sometimes you only need patience. Because when reality finally catches up to deception, it does all the talking for you.